Today is October 29th, 2022. This is my update for Russian military operations in and around Ukraine. I want to start by taking a look at the map, liveuamap.com. It is very pro-Ukrainian, so keep that in mind when looking at it. If you notice, the front line is more or less stable. That does not mean that both sides are not preparing their own respective offensives. Around Kherson, Russia is building up defenses against what they expect to be probably one of the last major offensives launched by Ukraine in this all-or-nothing push Ukraine has been making the last couple of months. If we go to the Donbas region, Bakhmut is being slowly encircled, and the city itself, the outskirts, Russian forces are working their way in and around the city. And if we zoom out, we see Bakhmut, Soledar, Seversk. This is the last major defense line Ukraine has in the east. These defense lines that have been built up over the last 7 or 8 years. Russia breaking through at Bakhmut will be a significant loss for Ukraine. So why isn't Ukraine able to stop Russia? If the tide has turned in Ukraine's favor, why are they unable to stop Russia's push around Bakhmut? It's because Ukrainian forces are overstretched. They do not have enough troops to go on the offensive and also hold the front line everywhere else. This is the same exact problem Russia had. This is why they've mobilized 300,000 additional troops. Ukraine does not have the ability to bring in that many more troops. They have been expending them since the end of February. They've been expending them. They don't have trained manpower to replace their losses with, let alone bulk up their defenses. They don't have the ability to do this. This is a problem that's just going to get worse and worse over time. Now, north of Bakhmut, around Zavatove and Kremlin, you see this road here, and you see Ukraine pushing towards it and attempting to take control over it, severing it essentially to cut Russian forces off further to the south. We've got articles about this. This one from Reuters: Ukrainian forces largely in control of Kyiv road in the east, says Kyiv. Well, largely in control and actually being in control are two different things. The article says Ukrainian troops are largely in control of a key road that links two Russian-occupied districts in the east of the country, pro-Kiev officials said. The road from Zavatove to Kremlin is practically under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine. Our soldiers are advancing daily, Sergei Gadai, governor of Lugansk region, told national television. Well, Sergei Gadai is the same one who said Lysychansk wasn't going to fall, and that during the Kharkov offensive, they were going to take back Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. They haven't even gotten close to either of those cities. So that's just, to gauge the credibility of what he is saying about taking control over this road. Now, keep an eye on this road. If Ukraine does manage to continue pushing eastward and severs this road, takes control over a section of this road and severs Russian lines of communication, that will be a good way to gauge the fighting capacity that Ukraine still has left in this part of the region. However, if Russian forces manage to push them away, or this just continues dragging on and neither side makes any progress, significant progress, then this is another indicator that Ukrainian forces are overstretched, and the momentum of this offensive that they went on has exhausted itself. Speaking of Kherson, again, let's go to the map and let's look at the situation. So we're in northeast. Let's go down to the south, Kherson city. You have the Dnieper River. Russia was evacuating civilians from the west to the east bank of the Dnieper. We have articles like this from The Independent. Russia completes Kherson evacuation as more blackouts hit Kyiv. The article cites a Russian militia leader. He says, we're preparing Kherson for defense. We're taking the civilian population out, in many ways untying our hands. A lot of people thought that evacuating the civilians from Kherson was a sign that Russia was about to give up the city. Now, they are preparing defenses around the city. They do not plan on giving up Kherson. If something goes wrong, however, they would most likely withdraw forces from Kherson city. It's not something they want to do. They will do everything they can to prevent that from happening. But if they are faced with a choice of fighting on and losing huge amounts of troops, or being encircled and having large numbers of troops captured, their heavy weapons destroyed or captured, they will withdraw, because that is what makes sense tactically and strategically. It will be a political blow, but it is not something they can't come back from. Ukraine, on the other hand, is trading their entire army in for these territorial gains before winter sets in. They have no way of replacing the manpower that they're losing, the trained manpower that they're losing. They have no way to replace the heavy weapons that they're losing. And I will talk about that a little bit later in regards to U.S. assistance packages that get more and more diluted. Again, Ukraine is expending their forces. They cannot replace what they are losing. Russia is preserving their manpower and their heavy equipment, even if it means temporarily giving up territory. They're also reinforcing their front lines with 300,000 additional troops. We have articles like this from the New York Times. Russia completes draft for Ukraine war and plans no more call-ups, Kremlin says. The article says, Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu said on Friday that the targets of drafting 300,000 reservists to replenish Moscow's forces in Ukraine had been met, declaring the end of a recent draft that has been marred by protests, chaotic bureaucracy, and a lack of proper training. Speaking at a meeting with President Vladimir Putin, Mr. Shoigu said that the defense ministry had stopped sending enlistment notices and there were no plans for further drafts. Well, there was no plan for a mobilization in the first place, but now there is. And I would not rule out additional mobilizations after this one. By beginning the conflict with contract soldiers and incrementally escalating, this draws everything out militarily, logistically, and politically. It makes it more manageable for Russia. I would not rule out other mobilizations. If Russia needs more troops, they're going to call up more troops. So that's what's going on the front lines. What's going on behind the front lines in Ukraine? What is going on? Russia has been relentlessly attacking Ukrainian infrastructure, the power grid especially. And they're doing it with these Geran 2 drones. And, well, first of all, let's look at articles like this from the BBC. Ukraine's war, Kyiv set for longer power cuts after airstrikes. Ukrainian authorities have warned people in the capital, Kyiv, to expect longer power cuts lasting more than 4 hours because of Russian attacks on energy infrastructure. So this is a very significant campaign systematically dismantling Ukrainian infrastructure. This is serious. This is something Russia has clearly committed itself to doing. Regarding these drones that they're using, and Russia has been using more and more drones as this fighting continues. More and more drones are showing up and being used more effectively, I might add. So we have articles like this from Al Jazeera. Ukraine minister tells Iranian counterpart, stop sending weapons. Ukraine's foreign minister Dmitry Kuleba has said he demanded Tehran stop providing Russia with weapons in a phone call with his Iranian counterpart. Ukrainian officials and their Western allies have accused Iran of providing so-called kamikaze drones to Russia, which have recently been used to devastating effect by Moscow's forces in strikes aimed at Ukrainian infrastructure. I've been seeing other articles in the Western media claiming that Ukraine is just brushing off these drone strikes. They're shooting down most of them. The few that get through are doing nothing. It's very clear that the Geran 2 is having a huge impact on Ukraine's infrastructure, and that they are unable to deal with it. They have nothing they can do to counteract it. The article also says something I want to point out. Also on Friday, Iranian nationals living in Ukraine held a protest in Kyiv against the Tehran government, allegedly supplying Russia with drones that have been used in Moscow's war in the country. And if you go to the article, there's a Geran 2 right there. If we scroll down, you're actually going to see a picture of these Iranians in Kyiv. And if you look closely, you'll see that that is not an Iranian flag. That is the flag of the Shah of Iran, the U.S. Client regime ousted in the 1979 revolution in Iran. So these are the U.S.-backed opposition, the same same circles of people trying to overthrow the government back in Iran. This is their supporters protesting in Kyiv. And I'm pointing this out so that you realize that everything that you see, all of these protests, all of these organizations, these groups of people coming out against Russia, coming out against Russia's allies, in this case, Iran, they are all connected directly to the US government. This opposition is so unpopular back in Iran, and it would not exist if the US did not continuously keep it propped up over all of these years. So just keep an eye out. When you hear them talking about groups of people, look at those photos and look for things like flags or symbols and try to figure out what they mean. There's so much more to the story. Al Jazeera, the BBC, the New York Times, they're not going to mention any of this. Now, I keep saying that Ukraine is running out of heavy weapons and the West has no ability to replace them. And that's based on things like this. From the U.S. Department of Defense, Sabrina Sin, Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary, holds a press briefing. She is talking about another assistance package. So the department is announcing the authorization of the 24th presidential drawdown of security assistance valued at up to $275 million to meet Ukraine's critical security and defense needs. This authorization is, again, our 24th drawdown of equipment from DoD inventories for Ukraine since August 2021. Then she gets into what is actually in this package. Additional ammunition for HIMARS, but they don't give a number. 500 precision-guided 155 artillery rounds. That is the GPS-guided Excalibur rounds. Notice on this list, there is no standard 155 millimeter artillery rounds. They are not sending additional standard artillery rounds in this package. And as I pointed out, the West itself admits they're out. They're out of 155 millimeter artillery rounds. They're trying to ramp up production. It will take a year or more just to ramp it up. And then much longer to actually get large quantities produced and sent to places like, say, Ukraine. 2,155 millimeter rounds of remote anti-armor mine systems. This is anti-tank mines that you fire from an artillery piece, and it scatters these anti-tank mines, and they're designed to self-destruct after 24 hours. 2,000 of those. 1,300 anti-armor systems. And then later on in the briefing, someone asked, what are those? Are those more javelins? And she says, no, they're not javelins, they're AT-4s. And an AT-4 is a much lighter anti-tank weapon, if you could even call it that. This is the official website for the AT-4, Saab. And if you look at the specs provided by the company that manufactures them, the effective range is 300 meters, and it can penetrate up to 350 millimeters of armor. The front armor on a T-72 is between 500 and 600 millimeters. So you're not getting through the frontal armor of any Russian tank. And you have to remember, that's just the steel armor. They also usually have reactive armor on top of that. So this AT-4 is practically useless. There's no fighting going on most of the time where Ukrainian soldiers are going to be 300 meters away from a Russian tank and be able to shoot at it with an AT-4. This is very unlikely. Also worth noting is the AT-4 is a single fire weapon. You fire it once and that's it. You throw it away. So again, 1,300 anti-tank systems. That sounds like a lot of assistance, but when you really look at the details, it leaves a lot to be desired. It really does. 2.75 million small arms rounds. Now, remember, I've told you many times, for a U.S. Marine, for example, their loadout is 210 rounds. That's what they carry on them into a firefight. And that won't get you very far in a firefight. If it's of any length of time, if you're fighting for half a day, 210 rounds, you will be through that very quickly. 210 rounds per man, 2.75 million rounds. That will arm about 3 brigades for a single day, or a battalion of 1,000 men for a week, and that is it. So again, even basic things like small arms ammunition, they're just not sending enough. These are packages that come out once or twice a month, and they include a day or maybe a week at best worth of ammunition for these weapon systems. 125 Humvees, 125 Humvees. Again, these are SUVs. Even the armored ones, they're glorified SUVs. They do not replace the armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, and certainly not the tanks that Ukraine has lost. And notice that those heavier armored vehicles are not on the list. The US is not sending those. They also talk about 4 satellite communications antennas. Now, again, she clarifies this during the briefing. She's asked questions about this. She says this is not to replace Starlink. This is an additional capability the US is giving them, and this is her reason why. We're seeing Ukrainian infrastructure and electrical grids being targeted by the Russians, and these antennas provide an additional capability on the ground at a critical time when Ukraine's infrastructure is being hit. So we can assume that Ukraine was using some sort of communication system that relied on the power grid, and now it has been disabled because the grid has been disabled. So they're sending these to try to compensate for that. She alludes to the fact that it's possibly for command and control, but you know, that's if the Pentagon's even telling us the truth about this. But that seems to be what the Pentagon is saying. There's also talk about air defenses. We're talking about single-digit numbers of systems being sent to Ukraine to replace Ukraine's dozens, if not scores, of anti-air systems. Anti-air systems that had better capabilities than the systems the US is turning over to Ukraine right now. They're not giving Ukraine enough to even protect a single city, let alone whatever is left of all of Ukraine's airspace. And this is, again, this is something that the West simply cannot do, not in any reasonable amount of time. It takes years to design, develop, manufacture the systems, and then also the ammunition for the systems. Where does that leave us? Ukraine has launched these all-or-nothing offensives. They're running their course. They are approaching the end. They're running out of heavy weapons. The West is unable to send any sort of reasonable military assistance to even replace what they've lost, let alone give them the abilities they need to push Russian forces out of what Kyiv considers Ukrainian territory. At the same time this is happening, Russia is bringing in 300,000 additional troops and all of the associated equipment. Russia still has tank factories upgrading existing tanks and producing new tanks. They have factories making artillery shells and small arms ammunition. They have all of this working around the clock, producing munitions, weapons, vehicles to be sent to the front. They have factories producing drones. Most likely Iran keeps denying they sent these drones to Russia because they didn't. They transferred the design, and Russia is building them in Russia. The West, for decades, reconfigured its military to fight small wars, and even then, there were times where they were running low on ammunition, and they had to really scrounge around to find what they needed to continue operations. Their military-industrial complex is configured for making maximum profits, not producing maximum capabilities. Russia clearly has invested heavily in its military-industrial complex, knowing that it was a matter of their own survival. That's why we see this growing disparity between Russian forces on the ground, getting seemingly stronger as this goes on, and Ukrainian forces, which are dwindling in number and capabilities. We got to keep a close eye on this. There's an inflection point coming where Ukraine's fighting capacity is going to irreversibly collapse. And there's nothing the West can do to stop that except intervene, as I've said many times before, to possibly create a buffer zone in Western Ukraine or around Odessa to prevent whatever's left of Ukraine from becoming landlocked. But other than that, there will be an inflection point where Ukraine's fighting capacity irreversibly collapses and Russian forces will begin moving forward. And it's hard to tell exactly when that will be. You need to know the exact disposition of troops on both sides to be able to take a stab at that date, at that timeline. But it will be coming soon. It'll either come before the next Ukrainian push, because we're overestimating what they have left, or their next push toward Kherson. However, whichever way that goes, even if they manage to take Kherson City, That will be the end of whatever they had left. And then you're going to see Russia make its move with its 300,000 additional troops. So we'll keep a close eye on that. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. If you're watching this on YouTube, please check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. I'm on Telegram. I update that several times a day. I'm also back on Twitter. It's under new ownership, I've heard. I'm on Twitter, Brian J. Berletic, no spaces, Brian J. Berletic. I will put it in the video description below. Just click on it and follow me. I'm also on Odyssey and Rumble, where all of my YouTube videos are automatically backed up on. They'll show up in a day or two. Subtitles on my YouTube videos, they will show up in a day or two. Please be patient. They're automatically generated, and I have no control over that. They will just show up when they show up. So thank you for your patience. In the video description below are all of the links that I've referenced, as well as ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel. If you see an ad, just skip it because it's not helping me out at all. If you do want to support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon, and also PayPal. To everyone who has been helping out, whether it's one-time donations, monthly donations, or even if you're just sharing my work with others, thank you so much. I saw people on Twitter the whole time I was permanently suspended sharing my content on Twitter for me because I wasn't there to do it myself. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And as always, thank you for watching.